My name is Bruno Horta, and I am the co-founder and CEO of Geoanalytics. Geoanalytics, it's a company that translates scientific needs into technological solutions through data-driven approach. And today I'm going to give you a presentation about AI-empowered research. So please feel free to interrupt me if you need a further explanation in a slide. Also, I've been talking to Serena here, and she explained me a little bit about the audience. So I will be covering the basics of AI. So please also, if you are already familiar, I'll have to give this background. I am a scientist myself. I studied chemistry, and I've been applying computational methods and computer science for solving chemistry and biological related problems over the years, and especially using simulations and machine learning and similar techniques to find insights on interesting problems. And frequently people come to us and with questions such as these ones, like, for example, how is AI used in biotech and medtech? Which industries in the life science sector are the most impacted by AI methods? Are there no obvious relationships between my data that I can't see just by making standard correlation analysis? How can I implement AI in my business if I'm not so sure I will succeed, and if I don't have budget to build an internal AI team? How can I quickly explore massive amounts of data and get interesting insights? And other questions. I hope that I will give you some hints towards answering those questions over this presentation. So paraphrasing Nietzsche, if you have a why, you can bear any how, right? So I'll start with why. Why is AI so relevant for biotech and medtech? What is AI and what are the areas of application? When is the best time to start using AI? Who is using AI the most? And at the end, I'll give you 5 tips to implement AI in your research and in your business. So first, why use AI, right? So over the past decades, we have developed an extraordinary ability to generate data. We have been generating tons of data from basically everywhere. So from mobile phones, from experiments, from devices, from many different sources. And this data is usually very complex, highly dimensional, has many attributes, and we usually rely on smart computational tools to make sense of this data and to help us get insight. And that's why the global AI market is increasing exponentially over the years. And why AI for biotech? Biotech is one of the fields that is benefiting the most from AI. So for example, screening large compound databases and trying to find insights and deriving knowledge that can be helpful for drug discovery applications, for drug design, for predicting pharmacokinetic profile of compounds and toxicity of compounds, designing proteins, folding proteins, for example, with AlphaFold, starting from the primary sequence of a protein and being able to predict its 3-dimensional structure has been a major breakthrough. Predicting protein stability and expression, predicting polypharmacology, that is drugs that can bind to multiple targets, and also finding new targets for diseases. So there are many different ways that biotech is benefiting from AI. What about medtech? Medtech is another industry that's benefiting a lot from AI. For example, in medical image recognition, there are many AI methods nowadays to help doctors look at MRI images, ultrasound images, tomography images, diagnostic of patients, rare diseases, for example, monitoring of chronic diseases, data gathered from medical devices and signal processing can be highly benefited from AI interpretation and insights. One example is this new device of brain for care that can, for example, measure the internal pressure of the brain in a non-invasive approach. That has been very invasive approach that the doctor has had to drill the skull of the patient to be able to measure the internal pressure of the brain. And nowadays this can be done in a non-invasive way with the use of AI. Smart hospitals, a new concept that gather data from many different sources, from medical devices, image, monitor, lab data, genomics, and combine everything to provide patients with better treatments. But before we explain what is artificial intelligence, let's first have a look at the definition of natural intelligence. Intelligence is a very difficult to define term. So if you ask 10 different people, probably get 10 different answers for intelligence, but this is one that I like. Intelligence is a term used to describe a property of the mind that encompasses many related abilities, such as the capabilities to reason, to plan, to solve problems, to think abstractly, to comprehend ideas, to use language, to learn. And artificial intelligence is a way to imitate that. So AI is the capability of a computer program to perform tasks or reasoning processes that we usually associate with intelligence in a human being, such as the items of the last slide. So for example, when you are playing chess, chess is usually something that a human does, right? So you expect some kind of human behavior in chess playing. And nowadays the computer plays chess so well that it's almost impossible to beat the best algorithms for chess players. So this is one example, a very common example of artificial intelligence, and many other video games are using AI to simulate the behavior of what is expected from a human being. AI is a very broad area and it's growing, and new sub-areas of AI are emerging. And this is just a picture of a few AI sub-areas. So there are many of them, and machine learning is probably the most widely known, most popular, and sometimes even confused with the concept of AI itself. So let's have a look at the definition of machine learning, because I'll be using this concept throughout the remainder of the presentation. So in the Oxford Dictionary, machine learning is the use and development of computer systems that are able to learn and adapt without following explicit instructions. So it's different from a conventional computer algorithm that you put all the instructions, everything that the computer has to do, but it's a way to program the computer without explicitly giving these instructions. The IBM definition is a bit more clear on that. Machine learning is a branch of artificial intelligence and computer science which focuses on the use of data and algorithms to imitate the way that humans learn, gradually improving its accuracy. So note that the word data is highlighted here, because machine learning learns from examples. So usually you start from a list of things that you have as examples, and you show that to the algorithm, and the algorithm has to learn the patterns and give the output. So for example, if you have pictures of cats or pictures of dogs, you can show these pictures of cats to the computer. That's a cat, that's a cat, that's a cat, some examples. And then dog pictures to the computer. That's a dog, that's a dog. And with these examples, the computer is able to generalize, so it can recognize a picture that, if it's a dog or a cat, in a picture that it was not used, that it has never seen before in the training data. So that's the concept of machine learning, and it's being used everywhere. So in pharma, healthcare, financial, oil and gas companies, basically everywhere. And how does this work? The machine learning cycle starts with a question. You want to predict something, right? So here is an example. Can I predict diabetes on patients? So for that, probably we have to show examples of things that are related to diabetes to the computer. So for example, we take blood tests, biomarkers, and other metrics of patients that have diabetes and patients that are healthy. And then you train your model, for example, a neural network or any kind of machine learning model, by showing these examples to the model. And to check if the model learned, you measure some quality of the model with, for example, a confusion matrix in a classification, but with a test set that the model hasn't seen before during training. And then you can use this algorithm after testing for performing some applications, and you can refine the model and go on again with this cycle. There are two basic types of machine learning methods. So supervised learning is when you show the label of the data. So you have a pre-categorized data or numerical values to show to the computer as a reference. For example, in the example that I described of the dog and the cat image, right? So you have told the computer what is a dog image and what is a cat image. In unsupervised machine learning model, you don't have label data in any way. So you have the hope that the computer will be able to cluster similar images, for example. Let's say you give a bunch of images of cats and dogs to the computer, and unsupervised machine learning is the separation of dog and cat pictures, but without telling explicitly what are those pictures. So just dividing by similarity. Supervised machine learning still has two categories. So classification, where you try to predict the category of a variable. For example, if the patient is diabetic or if is a healthy subject. Or regression, when you try to predict the actual numerical value of something. For example, the insulin level of the patients. Here are two examples. One on the left, classification, and one on the right, regression. So on the left, you can see here classification of tumor cells according to their malignancy. So here is a very simple and didactical example where only two parameters were used as input, the age and the tumor size. And the model is this brown line that is able to separate what is malignant tumors, what are benign tumors. So if this model is trained, you can give the age and the tumor size of a new data point that the computer hasn't seen before, and hopefully this model will be able to classify the tumor as benign or malignant. In a regression example, the numerical value is actually the target. So here is an example where the medical costs of treatments are predicted as a function of the age here in this plot. And you can see in this plot that the model, the line here is more or less fitting to the data points in blue and in red here. So red and blue here are if the patient is a smoker or if non-smoker. You can see that smokers are usually associated with more expensive medical treatment. Now I'm going to give you a practical example in more details. So ADMET prediction pipelines. In pharmacokinetic property prediction, you can train models to learn how to predict those variables from the chemical structure. So here, if you have a database of compounds with the, let's say, solubility values, for example, so you can make a model to predict solubility. Usually these databases of compounds, they encode the chemical structure using a SMILES string. Is this kind of strings that are represented here, and here is an example of ibuprofen where you have the SMILES strings here below. So these SMILES strings encodes this chemical structure. So there are many databases out there with solubility data that you can use to train a model. You don't even have to have your own data for that. So you can give us input to this pipeline that I will describe. So first of all, I have to curate your data. So clean the data, standardize the chemical structures, treat duplicates, and so on. This can be done using cheminformatics libraries such as RDKit, for example. Then you apply some chemical filters, like medchem filters, to follow some, to remove some molecules that are uninteresting. And then you have two options. You can either represent those chemical structures with descriptors or fingerprints that are pre-calculated by algorithms. So because the computer will not understand this smile string. So you basically use the chemical structure to pre-calculate physical chemical properties or other properties or descriptors, or even fingerprints like the Morgan fingerprints. And with these fingerprints or descriptor vector, then you can perform your training of your model. So you will give as input a vector with descriptors or fingerprints and train your machine learning model. And then you have a model that is able to predict solubility with a certain accuracy. The other way to solve the same problem is to try to learn the representation on the fly. And that's the purpose of deep learning and graph neural nets in this regard. So you could train graph neural nets to learn the molecular representation and the solubility prediction all at once, because this already have a treatment to encode the molecule using embeddings, and you don't have to perform this step of choosing and calculating your descriptors. So it's a more direct way of making the predictions. So this has become very important, and one can see here in this example that gained a lot of highlights. So this example of usage of a deep learning approach to predict antibiotic discovery was the headline of many important newspapers, and Nature, MIT, BBC, and The Guardian all reported on this article because it was a major breakthrough in antibiotic development. And it was a deep learning approach using this kind of encoding that I've shown you. All right, so now that I gave you all these examples, let's try to go to more practical questions. When should you start using AI in your research and in your business? So do you collect data from devices or experiments? Maybe you already have databases. Maybe you can already use the data that you've collected to try to speed up processes and gain insights. Or maybe you don't have data, but there are plenty of data out there. So there are public databases that can help you to answer most relevant questions that you might have. And maybe gaining insight from external data can bring you to the next level. And who is benefiting the most from AI? So AI, as I said, is being used everywhere. So marketing, recommendation systems, sales, human resource allocation, many different areas, supply chain. But the area that benefits the most and that is using AI the most is R&D. So according to this O'Reilly survey, 50% of all R&D people that were interviewed answer positively to the usage of AI. So as promised, now I'm going to give you 5 awesome tips on how to implement AI in your research. Use your data, but also take advantage of external data. So sometimes you may have a limited number of data points in-house that you can complement and integrate with external data and make a lot of value from that. Just to give a very quick example, imagine that you have data on patient profiles. You can't do much with that, right? But if you combine that with historical medical records of those patients, you can already use this data to predict the outcome of treatments. And let's say you combine that with healthcare economics data. You can use it now to compare the price of different treatments and to predict cheaper alternatives for that kind of treatment. So integrating data from different sources usually gives a lot of power and decision making. Data can be integrated in many different ways, and one very powerful technology that has been used to integrate data from many different silos is knowledge graph. So knowledge graph is a very interesting concept for solving this problem. Tackle bottlenecks in your business and in your research. So try to tackle the most important question. Try to tackle what's limiting the growth of your business. So maybe it's fragmented data, you could integrate, you could develop better ways for human resource allocation, for automating repetitive tasks. So the important thing is to try to recognize what is keeping you behind. I like this one very much. Plan AI to benefit and not to displace your workforce. So don't think that AI is going to replace human intelligence. I like this sentence from this piece of text from Alessandro Negro. The capability of processing an enormous amount of data goes beyond human possibilities. Nevertheless, this is why machine learning has been introduced. In any case, at the end of these processes, it is always human responsibility to evaluate the insights and, more in general, the results of this analysis and to make informed and wiser decisions based on them. So at the end, who is going to take the decision is a human brain. Start small and experiment. So think about designing a proof of concept. Do not try to solve all the problems at once. Think big, but start small. Take a piece of your problem, try to implement AI, try to see the benefits, try to evaluate it in terms of metrics that you can then show to other people and discuss if the process was beneficial for your process. And then you try to scale that to solve other problems. And use experts. So you don't have to do everything on your own. There are many firms out there that can help you to implement AI in your business. So if you have an internal team, try external consultancy to bring new technologies and new methods and new views to your problems, because then you get a much better view of the extent of the AI technology that you can use. It's more or less when you play chess, people that are watching you play, they see moves that you don't see. And if you don't have an internal team, there is also the possibility to outsource parts of your processes. What is important to know here is that it is important to consult with people that understand your core business, that understand science, because they will be able to translate your needs into a technological solution. And I'll finalize the presentation showing two real cases. One case is from NXT Bio from Irvine, so maybe some of you know about them. So there is one project in NXT that is related to heart disease prediction from wearable device signals. And this is a project that we will use AI and a device to be able to predict this condition and reduce rehospitalization rates, which in a disease that is probably the disease that the most dangerous disease, that is heart-related diseases. So this is a very interesting project that can save many lives. Another interesting example now in biotech is the use of knowledge graph for drug discovery by Nintex. So Nintex is using knowledge graph to map diseases and targets and genes and the literature and try to gain insight from this knowledge graph and derive a solution to speed up the discovery timelines in pharma projects. So the drugs will be selected on the basis of this knowledge graph. Of course, validation will be carried out with experiments, but the idea is that this will be very helpful in the decision-making process, enabling the medicinal chemists to make faster decisions and to visualize new potential biological targets for diseases and potential drugs, and also for drug repurposing possibilities. So I'd like to finalize with these slides. Many people assume implementing AI is very costly, time-consuming, and with no guarantee of success. So I recommend to get started with minimum investment. Design a POC and start playing with AI. You might get surprised. With the right partners, development time can be significantly reduced, and be open to innovation. A small step towards data-driven approach may result in a large return on investment. So with that, I want to finish and thank you all for your attention, and I am happy to take your questions.
All right, thank you, Bruno, for your presentation. Does anyone in the audience have any questions? We did finish a little early, so this is perfect time to use Bruno and have any questions about AI.
And also feel free to reach out if you don't want to ask questions right now.
Yes, yes. If you're feeling a little shy, Bruno's email is on the screen, so you can feel free to send him an email directly as well. Okay. I guess your presentation was so thorough, no one has any questions.
I'll ask a question. Hi, Bruno, it's Nadine from Chalk Research. Can you talk a little bit about how you managed with these kinds of projects an interdisciplinary team when you've got patients, patient advocacy groups, MDs, engineers, if you have any advice for that?
Yes. So thank you for your question. Yeah, when you have, let me know if I understood you completely, but when you have multidisciplinary teams, right? It's imperative that everyone is speaking the same language. So this project can be successful. If you want to implement an AI project that is successful, it's very important that everyone understands what is the goal, that everyone understands what is the benefit of the technology. So it's very good to have, to not think that communication is a waste of time. So communication is key in the beginning, especially when you are designing your experiments. You have to align expectations. That's very important. So sometimes people have a wrong idea of AI and what AI can bring as a solution. So it's very important to give everyone enough background that you know what to expect from your AI projects. So for example, engineers may be more familiar with the computer science part, but maybe the domain expert is from the medical field. So this conversation has to be carried out thoroughly, so everyone understands what AI is going to bring for this project. Does this answer your question?
That was great. Yes, because we do have different levels of education, subject matter expertise, but also what people want from the projects and where they want to pull the data from. Most of our doctors want to get the right data at the right time when a decision needs to be made, but the engineers don't really design the system that way to do that. So sometimes that's where we get stuck.
Yes, so for that, I mean, if the data is highly dimensional, so sometimes you have data coming from many different sources, and the knowledge graph approach can be very, very helpful to translate that into a language that anyone can understand. So when you build such a system, you already build some kind of visualization engine that you see on the screen which pieces of data are connected to which. You can see the relationships of this data, and this minimizes the need for understanding of what's going on behind the screen. So for the medical doctors, when they see this kind of connected data on a graph, they can immediately see, because it's transparent. So for example, patient A has disease B, this disease is classified into this category. There are these treatments for this disease. So everything is connected and shown on the screen in a natural language, not in a computer language. So this makes things more transparent for the decision maker and for the domain experts.
Thank you.
Welcome. I'm happy to take more questions.
Yeah, we actually have one in the chat. I'm going to read this out loud. It says, hello, Bruno. Thanks for the excellent presentation. You said that it would be a good practice to use open data and merge them with our data in order to make more reasonable AI models. I'd like you to talk a little bit about how to deal with projects in which we only have a little amount of data, and of cases you needed to solve issues related to a lack of data to get a project done.
Very nice question. Yes, so there are many different strategies there. Okay, so first, understand what kind of prediction can be made with AI. There are some methods that are good for large data sets. For example, deep learning usually shines when you have a very large data set. But there are methods that can be used with small data sets. And sometimes the method doesn't have to be super complex. You can use, for example, a decision tree or a random forest, SVM, some methods that are more conventional, and they can already make sense with a small data set. Sometimes you need to enrich your data by imputing new data, importing new data, ingesting new data from other sources. And there is also the possibility for generating synthetic data. So there are some companies out there that are actually specialized on the generation of synthetic data to enrich data sets for AI models. So there are basically many different options. I would try to first see what kind of result you get from a simple model in a small data set. Check if you're able to predict something with a simple model. Check if your data is distributed well, because sometimes it's not only about the amount of data, but also about the quality of data. So if you only have data that is very similar, this data is not bringing much knowledge, and your model will not be able to generalize well. But if you have diversity in your data set, if your data set covers many different possible outcomes and possibilities, and you have a diverse data set, then this data is probably much more valuable than having thousands of data points that are very close to each other. So quality of data is actually more important than quantity of data. I hope this has answered your question.
Thank you. We have another one that says, this was so helpful. Thanks, join team. This technology seems like it could be used in many different contexts. I appreciate your expertise in science, but what about other industries like banking?
Yeah, so the methods themselves, they are very similar, right? So when you tackle a banking problem, most likely the methods will be the same, but the domain is different, right? So and that's why I also come back to the first question that was also a very important one. understanding the language of the specific domain is very important to understand what are the limitations of the models, how can the models generate value in this business. So not only that, but everyone has to be on board. So if there is a AI company that is specialized in banking, probably they already have worked on many cases on banking, and they know how to solve this specific problem of banking. But the solutions algorithmically, they are similar. So the methods that are used for banking, for prediction in banking, they can be the same used for other situations. For example, time series forecasting. Time series forecasting is used in financial markets. Is also used in climate prediction. So yes, I hope this answers the question. But what makes the difference is the domain expertise.